Hello, everybody. Hello. Alright, it is that time again. Even though I keep forgetting to upload these. In fact, I'm running space on my computer to store these. So, gonna have to start pruning old footage. And I didn't turn there when I planned to again. Oh well. But yeah, I keep meaning to upload and batch together all these, and then I forget all about doing it because I end up being really tired by the time I get to sleep, and I forget all about actually going and uploading these. So, more delay. I do promise that I will eventually get around to it. If I could do other stuff while I was uploading, it would be so much easier. In fact, I tried some streaming again the other day, and the latency to any servers I play on was just way too high to actually do anything useful. Lots of stuttering and other stuff. Not helping. As you can probably tell, it's raining. So, utterly fun. Wants to stick to my window today, too. But it's not so bad. It's also only 55 degrees, though I don't think 55 is all that bad. I know my mom in particular thinks that 55 is downright frigid. But that is not so much the case for me. Didn't need to stop there, but there was a car coming and I couldn't tell if I had a light to go or not. Always fun. Back to the roundabout way. Alright, I looked at news stories and I didn't see anything I really wanted to talk about. At least not that I haven't already touched on. Didn't finish quite either of my two most recent rants. The one about copyright and the other one on the systems for cars that disable them. Well, I mentioned the story, not so much my take on that. In fact, since that was the last one I did for today, I think I'll pick that one back up. I had explained that these systems can potentially be hazardous because they have no idea where or what you're doing with the vehicle when they disable them. And they tend to disable them almost at a whim after you don't make one payment. So it could be the next day after, could be 3 days later, could be a week later. Those are all relatively short periods that were all talked about in the article I read. And they hold you hostage for the ability to drive a vehicle. As you can see, I'm driving, so I have a sort of vested interest in this. And the reason I can't take some other mode of transport to where I'm going is because that transport doesn't exist. There are no buses, there are no trains, there are no mass transit systems between me and the location that I go to for work. And I've had many people say, well, move closer to where you work. It's just not that simple. I mean, first of all, you have trying to sell the place that you have if you own it, and if you don't own it, you usually have a period that you're contractually obligated to stay there, with usually massive termination fees, at least based on how much each payment is. It is pretty cheap to live where I do, as far as housing costs. Food costs, not so much, because there's travel basically to get anywhere. That's not going to try to rip you off food-wise. And actually, the prices that are a rip-off aren't really so bad when you factor in the cost of all the gas. They're still not great, but they're not as bad as some people make it out to be, like my parents. They will go out of their way to use every single coupon possible and every deal and they'll weigh the deals, but they don't factor in cost of transport usually. In the city, the costs of food are usually less, same for the cost of gas, ironically enough. So it's cheaper to get gas while you're there than it is down here. And that factors into everything. I mean, that even affects the costs for the big rigs, the semis, to actually deliver the stuff to the local grocery stores, which is part of why their costs are higher. Probably not a significant chunk in the long run, but it still raises the costs of food transportation, which is utterly ironic since there's a lot of farmland that you tend to see. I mean, we're going by a field right now. I don't think it's actually growing anything productive. The ones down here, though, are growing corn. Probably not human-eatable corn. And from what I've heard, it tends to be the type of sweet corn that they feed to things like cattle, livestock of all sorts, in fact. If someone out there knew what the codes were to identify them, because they usually mark what fields are done with what line, for lack of a better term, of seeds, you could probably tell us all what they're growing. I mean, right here is a dairy farm. No cows out right now, but it's actually part of the overall farm. That's why they have the farmland in the first place. They're growing the corn for the cows, which make the milk, which we use for milk and cheese and all that good stuff. So, we could source way more food locally than we do too, but we don't do that either. This gets into what I think needs to eventually happen, in some form, shape, size, whatever, which is a sort of right to travel. With things so sprawled out in a large portion of the United States, I know people in the big cities can't really identify with this, but people that aren't in the like top 20 largest cities in the U.S. can probably identify with the fact that everything sprawls. It can be miles to get to where you're going. I mean, my trip is about 17 miles roughly. That's my daily commute. any deviations from my daily commute end up raising that, but it's roughly 17 miles. And if I didn't have some form of car, truck, motorcycle, something like that, I wouldn't be getting there because there's no other option. Yet, we don't treat vehicles quite like that in the US. I mean, at least we're starting to not so much, I guess would be a way to put that. People in the cities don't tend to need cars quite as much, which is why, like, my ex never got a driver's license. It just was not needed. Well, it could be needed, but not as much. There were buses, so if you planned out your route, you could get there without too much hassle. Though I talked about it last time, there's a lot of issues because there is usually a hassle involved. Buses don't run on time, which means you gotta go much earlier than you expect to be wherever you want to be. Basically, buses tend to be a time waster. At least on all the bus I just cannot talk. Bus lines that I've ever seen. And it looks like we might be passing this guy, because I don't really want to be behind the semi if I don't have to be. And I know there's passing zones coming up. So we'll see how that goes. I don't think I've passed anyone while you guys have been watching before, and that sucks to be that guy. But yeah, with the people getting poorer and poorer, which is also part of what I was talking about yesterday, it gets harder and harder to afford the common form of transportation in the U.S., which is a car. And there are more financial opportunities in a city usually to make good amounts of money than there is in the countryside outside of the cities. That doesn't quite include suburbs, though most people in the suburbs don't work in the suburbs because jobs in the suburbs don't pay very well either. In fact, I found it ironic once. I read a story where people in the suburbs were trying to bus people in from the inner city to work in the suburb, while people in the suburbs were driving in to work in their fancier jobs, because none of them wanted to work for the crappy pay that is all anyone would give in the suburb for most of the jobs. But no one was willing to pay any more for those jobs. So the only thing they had to do was to go for the most poor people they could find who needed jobs and who wanted jobs, but had no luck finding any because they weren't deemed qualified for any of those jobs. They were, however, qualified for the low-pay jobs in the suburbs. They had no transportation, so they could never get there. So they decide to reverse engineer the transportation system and go backwards so that they're busing out the people from the inner cities, which is the only place they can just barely live, to the suburbs where they could never actually afford to live. And I found that utterly hilarious. First world problems indeed. That is definitely one. And I cannot see around this truck at all because of all the water it's throwing off. makes passing it really hard. Insanely hard. So I don't think I'm going to pass them. Sorry. I'd like to. I mean, I don't want to have water sprayed on me constantly. Luckily, at least this road doesn't have any big giant hills that you'd be going super slow on. So he's actually doing right around the speed limit. About 53 to 55. Sorry. But tired still today. Been a bit low on energy the last couple of days, actually. Oh, and he wants to go up the hill with me. Oh no, I'm not having this. This is gonna suck. And I know there's a passing zone on that hill, so we're going to use that passing zone in the second half of this hill to get around this guy. We're now doing not even 20 miles an hour, and he realizes that he's not going to get up the hill at any decent rate of speed. Yeah, we'll just trudge up the hill at 15. That's fuel efficient. Down to 10. Wow, this guy does not know how to get up the hill. Well, we're back up to like 16 now, and then he slows down again. I think it was shifting gears. Loses a little bit of speed every time he does that. And there's cars coming. I can just sort of see them. Yep, and then we go around him. Actually hit 55 as my top speed going around them, so that was kind of impressive. Up to the speed I wanted to be going. I don't need the windshield wipers on as high anymore, because I'm not getting sprayed with water. Well, that completely derailed my topic, though. But it might have been entertaining for you guys. You guys have never seen me pass anyone before. I don't know how an action shot looks on one of these cameras. We'll have to see when I go and finish this. Alrighty. So, yes, right to transportation. Basically, kind of like the right to free speech in a sense. There should be some guarantees of ability to travel, which means if no other option exists, there should be a mandate to have the government fill that role. And that's just to level the playing field. The rich have already way too many advantages that they have routinely left the rest of us behind. In fact, for any good-paying job, the usual way to actually get one anymore is to know someone. But if you don't happen to know anyone with the right connections, you don't get one. It's a simple thing, but I mean, to some people that makes a lot of sense, but that doesn't necessarily get you a good person or even a knowledgeable person. It just gives you someone that someone knows and at least thinks enough of that they're willing to tell you about them. But all too often that leaves out definitely any person that's considered poor to get any real good job, because you never meet anyone through your social circles. The internet, for some people, has started to fix that. Sort of vaguely hoping that this might have some consequences along that line. It would be nice if this would lead to future opportunities for me. And I can turn off the wipers now. It's not so much raining anymore. That's just accumulation on the road. But yeah, without some way to level the playing field, the rich always have an advantage. And I know the rich people would hate this message, but the rich don't in any way deserve to have an advantage just usually because someone previously in their family line had money. Most people do not become rich from working these days. They become rich because the parent, grandparent, etc. was rich, or at least made significant money, so that you end up in a higher social standing than you originally were. There's not a lot of social mobility for most people. There's a lot of lines that suggest that you should have social mobility, but it doesn't tend to happen. It's part of why the gap between the rich and the poor keeps growing. The rich don't usually know or understand poor people, and the poor people certainly don't really understand the rich, except that they're all assholes. They might not be all assholes, but that's certainly the perception that most poor people are going to have, because there's no interaction between the two groups, at least not if the wealthy can help it, usually. I don't recall who this quote is associated with, but during the housing crisis, when people were losing their homes left and right as their mortgages failed because they were out of their jobs, at least one rich and famous person whose name, I'm pretty sure it was a woman, I don't have any clue what it was, but who said that, oh, well, if they lose their house in the city, why don't they just move to their country house? Which, yeah, that's insane, because sure, if you have money to have two houses, you probably, first of all, aren't really in a hurry to lose one, because you probably have more than enough money to cover both of them for a good bit of time, and the investments to take care of that in perpetuity, usually. But you're also going to have it where if things really came down to it, you could sell one house and use the other. But most people don't have a whole bunch of houses. I have known one person that had a bunch of houses. Well, okay, I know more than one person. There's a couple of people I know technically that own more than one house. Heck, even my parents technically own more than one house, but the other house isn't making any money for them. It's just a big waste of money that I keep telling them they should have gotten rid of a long time ago, but they didn't listen to me. Mostly because it's still full of my grandmother's old stuff. And she was a pack rat. And they never have enough time to actually go through it all, which is the catch-22 that they always go through. they'd like to do something in the house. They want to go through everything before they throw everything away. Not that they would actually throw anything away. I got news for you. They're just as much pack rats as my grandmother used to be. They'll probably get rid of very little, but it's just a money sink for them, and they would have been much better off to get rid of it a long time ago. A long time ago. Which is what I told them over a decade ago. But no, they did not do that. The whole requirement to check first screwed that up. And I don't think I'm going to get a spot really close up there because everyone just came through. But we'll see. Well, I can go over here, or I can go over there. I think I will go right here. Go. I want to back up a little, figuring these guys will let me, so I can get a little straighter into this spot. There we go. Alright, I will see you all later. Take care. Welcome back, everybody. It's that time again. The rain is gone, so there's that at least. Not that there isn't still water on the road, but it's not falling on our heads anymore. Unfortunately, still don't have any news, and I did finish up the talk that I was, the subject of the talk that I was using earlier. So I don't have that right now. I'm sure when I get home I will notice something that has just come out and I should have talked about, but I won't know about yet. Unfortunately, I don't have internet access on the drive between here and there. And since I'm in class, I don't have a very good chance to check. I can glance over them, usually between classes, but that's about the limit of what I can do. Unfortunately, no cellular connectivity. Well, there's cellular service, certainly, but not that I have. Well, that leaves me at a conundrum for what to talk about, since I didn't have any specific ideas. Though, I have talked about space before, and I think I might go on to expand on that. One of those things that I don't think we've really talked about so far, except in the abstract, is acceleration. There are two things that matter in speeds, in the way we think about them, at least in space. And I think I might have mentioned that before. There is your current speed and your rate of acceleration that matter. Acceleration, as I think I've noted, is usually measured in G's or standard gravities. And the reason for that is the human body. Our bodies are not really designed to take a lot of gravity at any given time. I mean, we're basically designed to work in 1G environments, and we can go beyond that given certain circumstances. In fact, we have more than that, for instance, when driving a car. Not by much usually, but if you stop suddenly or accelerate suddenly, you actually do get beyond single gravity as far as acceleration is concerned. And 1G isn't a lot of acceleration per se. It's 3.3 meters a second, if I recall correctly. I'm saying that off the top of my head, so I could be way off right now. But I believe it's 3.3 meters a second. Squared. The square is important because that tells you that for every second you're gaining another 3.3 meters a second. So the first second of acceleration is 3.3, and the second one is an added 6.6, which makes your total speed at that point, at the end of the second to be 9.9 meters a second. And basically you have this sort of geometric growth pattern where it gets progressively larger and larger and larger the more G's of acceleration you do and for the longer amount of time. But very few things tend to accelerate faster than a few G's, at least on Earth, because it's kind of hard to get to those. The closest we come tends to be in jet fighters. Fighter jets, especially really fast fighter jets, actually without being super fast from a theoretical perspective, still manage to do a lot of G-forces, usually during turns. And so for a fighter pilot, what they tend to refer to as G-tolerance is a very important thing. Because any sudden movements in a fighter jet that's already moving at very high speeds puts a lot of G-forces onto both the craft and the person in it. However, our ability to create structures that can take large amounts of G-forces, like a fighter aircraft, far exceeds what the human body can do. I mean, in an accident, a human body can live through several hundred G's, but for microseconds. Very, very, very short periods of time. And that's usually just the time of impact. And for longer stretches, like fighter aircraft go through, they actually wear special suits because even early on, as far back as World War I, there were maneuvers that you could do that would put so many G's on you that almost everyone would start to black out. Tunnel vision effects, bunches of other stuff. In fact, there's some really good medical research about things like the cornea being detached from high G-force maneuvers over long periods of time. So beyond what would be measured in minutes, we can't tend to go much past about 9 G's reliably without aid. With aid, there are some suits that they have designed that pump the blood in your body around on a more or less even basis by inflating bladders. And these pressure bladders keep the blood from congealing either in your head or in your feet, and both of those things are incredibly bad for the human body. Those give us a G tolerance of about 12 Gs from the stuff I've read. Anything beyond 12 Gs of acceleration for more than a few minutes is a bad thing. In fact, they've tried to go beyond that, but the long-term issues are just way too high. That said, every human being has a slightly different G tolerance, so the average is 12, which means a few people probably can get up into like the 15 range, and a few people can't do much more than, say, 6, but it all averages out. 6 unaided. Sorry. And there's actually a world record holder so far for people they've tested in G-force training exercises, which they use a centrifuge for. Big, giant centrifuge. NASA is one of the places that has one of those facilities, though I believe the Air Force has some too. And there's a current record holder for the world for unaided highest G-force before becoming unconscious. Not super impressive, because it's about the level that you can get with mechanical aid. So, yeah, that's about our tolerance, and you don't even want to hold that for more than a very short period of time. Half an hour would be pushing it quite a bit. 15 minutes would probably be stretching it. For any length of time, the human body is going to want either 1 G or maybe up to about 2 Gs. We could probably exist in a 2G environment for an indefinite stretch of time, though there are all sorts of medical issues that would crop up, just like you get in zero gravity or microgravity, as it's better called. Microgravity is simply in a position like you are in orbit, where the gravity sort of balances out. You're not, how do I want to put it? You're not plummeting into the ground, in a sense, but you're also not escaping gravity's pull. So they sort of balance out. You're not going down, you're not going up. Technically, though, the best way to put it is that you're sort of falling towards the planet, but you keep missing. It's probably the best way to describe microgravity. That's what, like, the space station, the ISS, has. It's effectively falling towards the ground at all times, but falling in such a way that it always misses actually going into the atmosphere any further. And that's what we tend to call microgravity. Most people just call it 0G or zero gravity, because that's a sort of classic term now for it. Not in technical circumstances, but most people aren't that technically inclined for that sort of thing. But the reason acceleration is such a critical thing is that acceleration is critical in building up speed to either get somewhere else or decelerate from trying to get to somewhere else. I already explained earlier how you have to decelerate as you get close to an object by firing in the opposite direction usually. Or you would go right past the object you're aiming at or smash into the ground, and neither of those is a particularly good thing by any stretch of the imagination. So, we can get up to a couple of G's of gravity, and probably for practical reasons, we would keep it at about 1 G of gravity in acceleration, moving about our solar system. That puts a lot of practical limits on how quickly we can get to places like Mars. I'm not doing the math right now because the math gets kind of complex. Neither the Earth nor Mars stays still. So we sometimes are closer together, sometimes we're farther apart. It's really hard to say because of that exactly what the conditions are. So I can't say at 1 G it would take us X long to get to Mars, for instance, from the Earth. On the other hand, I can say that during this specific window of time, which is usually how scientists and engineers refer to it, they'll have a time window to perform a particular action. Within that window, basically the numbers line close enough that we can say on average it is X particular number. That's so hard for most people to think about, though. Kind of along the same lines of the fact that we effectively are falling towards the planet all the time while we're in space, and we just keep managing to miss it when we're in orbit. Of course, when you stop being in orbit, you start falling towards the planet and succeeding in hitting it, which no one really wants to do. That's not pleasant, not even to think about. Though that's happened with satellites before, they can't stay up in orbit anymore, and eventually they have to come back down. Usually our control over them is fairly limited by that point, so we can't really aim where they land too well. Not that we haven't attempted to guess. I believe it was Taco Bell that had a big thing a while ago where they put basically a bullseye in the ocean where they thought a satellite, if I recall correctly, was going to land when it came back down. They didn't get it right. I don't think anyone managed to actually get it right. I think it took a while of searching for it to actually locate it because we'd been nearby on a scale of hundreds of miles, but not close enough to actually just get over to it before it went under the water. Well, what was left of it. An object falling from orbit and hitting the ocean doesn't fare so well. Water, and most people don't understand this, isn't compressible. It doesn't really tend to give when you act on it. I mean, in our limited scale, it tends to move out of the way when we push against it. But it doesn't tend to do that the faster the motion that causes it. That's why there's a huge difference between slapping the water and gliding your arm through the water. One, you get that surface tension because of the incompressibility of water, at least at room temperatures. Once it becomes ice, it actually does sort of compress, because I forget which way it goes. Water is a little bit weird and backwards compared to most other compounds we know of. One way it shrinks, the other way it expands, and the ways that it does that, I believe, are inverse to most other similar objects. Stop, I think. Nope. They're both going. I'm going. There we go. All done. Well, I did actually stop, but not for very long. I just had to know which direction the other guys are going first. But yeah, anyways. If you were up even a couple of stories and you fell into the water would feel a lot like smacking into any other solid type of ground. Not really what I'd want to fall into. There are ways that you can affect that. I mean, high dive experts know how to get into the water just right so that they don't hurt themselves when they do that. Usually by knifing into the water, providing as little surface area as possible. But that's not really going to stop your fall. And certainly a satellite is not doing that. I guess if you did it just right and you were falling into something like the Pacific Ocean and you didn't have to worry about something like breaking your legs or arms when you hit, theoretically you could probably as a human land better in water than against the ground. But the conditions it would take to do that are arms that could take several gravities of impact without splintering into little pieces. And that's not really going to work. I mean, they do and have had now at least one person that has skydived from low Earth orbit. He took a balloon up to the edge of what we call space, and then he skydived out of it. He didn't get up to high G-forces mostly because of methods to control his descent. He didn't just hop out with no aids, because you don't go parachuting without aids. You're certainly not going skydiving from orbit without those same sorts of aids, if not slightly different ones. He also needed this suit that would protect him from some of the conditions he'd experience. So, yeah, he was able to do that reliably. That doesn't really affect G-forces, because I slightly got off topic, but it's related. At 1 G of acceleration, though, it does take a very long time to get up to any reasonable fraction of light. Speed of light, that is. I think that I did some math on that a while ago, and I worked it out to take somewhere around a year's worth of pure acceleration to reach the general vicinity of the speed of light. However, you're not really going to find a system that humans can currently build that could actually accelerate at 1 G for an entire year. That just would not happen. That puts a practical limit to how fast and how far we can go. And of course, since you can't just accelerate it up to that speed and then expect to not have issues trying to slow down. I mean, if you get to, say, half the speed of light, and it takes you, say, 6 months to do it, you need another 6 months of fuel to slow down, or you will fly right out of the solar system eventually. And I say eventually because the solar system at even half the speed of light would take a fairly lengthy amount of time to cover. We don't have anything so far that has ever accelerated to even half the speed of light, though, which means it would take years to fly out of the solar system. Based again on the limitations of 1G, potentially 2Gs of acceleration max. And it's also why NASA considers it kind of impractical for humans to go into space. I still say that we need to do it because, well, of multiple reasons really, but the biggest is that we lack that sense of exploration that we used to have. We need to push the boundaries of our knowledge, and we just don't tend to do that anymore. Some people are happy with how far we've gotten into space currently, but I think humans really need to be the ones out being explorers again. And, I mean, the thing about explorers, and the thing that every astronaut has known, is that there is a risk involved with doing that. And they accept the risks, but we as a population don't tend to like those risks when they actually come up negative for us. Things like the shuttle accident that basically totaled manned spaceflight for years. And we've been scaling back even before that began, but it really put a downer on the whole space program when we had the last shuttle accident. And shuttle accidents have happened several times. Not a high rate of occurrence, really. Maybe slightly worse odds than, like, driving a car, but that's mostly because of how new it is, and the fact that, for all intents and purposes, getting on a rocket and flying up into space is strapping a whole bunch of explosives under you and attempting to fly off the ground. That we get it right so often should probably be more of a surprise than the fact that it occasionally goes catastrophically wrong. Anytime you have a highly complex system, it becomes more and more prone to having issues. But I think that basically covers what I wanted to say about acceleration and moving in space, other than the fact that actually getting close to another object that is also traveling at similar velocities is just crazy insane. I mean, when you're traveling at even, say, a tenth of the speed of light, which is incredibly fast, still way faster than anything we've ever had in space, so far at least. But even at a tenth of the speed of light, which on a grand scale is still not that fast, there are some intrinsic issues that we have. Because, for all intents and purposes, and we just got here right after the train. I don't know if you guys wanted to watch the train or not, but there are actually trains that pass through here. Don't really want to get too far up there, because that guy up there is not really in the lane he wants to be. but I'm not sure if he's turning into grocery store or maybe the Rite Aid, or if he's turning at the intersection, because there's too many things here he could be turning into. And you see even the cops actually go through this light when it's not a turning arrow. However, I knew I was going to get stopped and end up in the intersection. Since the train just went by, I'm not too afraid to sit on the tracks. And you want to get up kind of far here, because the only way you get through this is to be up high, getting in the way of traffic. Otherwise, you're just going to sit at the intersection and you're never going to get through until the next time the light turns green. But yeah, even at a 10th speed of light, you're moving at tens of thousands of miles every second. So very small fluctuations in how you're moving can make very big differences in how close to another object you get. And if it's a very small object, like say another ship, trying to get those two to intersect is like trying to thread a needle with like a gun. Probably not impossible if you set everything up just right, but not very practical. It's one of the reasons I don't think most space combat, once there is combat in space, and we all know it will eventually happen, because wherever we go, we end up fighting other people. But, when space combat does happen, it's probably going to be around something like a planet or a moon, where you're not going to be working at fractions of the speed of light. You're going to be working at fairly low speeds. Practical speeds that we as humans can work with. And that's the way it's going to be. And I'm going to leave it there, because I am home. Have fun and take care, everyone. And I will see you later.